What if I told you your mind lied to you today, and you didn't even notice? It wasn't a dramatic lie, it was a whisper, a gentle recalibration of reality that seemed like instinct but was actually fear. Maybe you avoided a conversation and told yourself it was a matter of timing. Maybe you missed an opportunity and called it maturity. Maybe you were silent and called it wisdom. But what if it was nothing like that? What if your mind is not a real lighthouse, but a genius guardian of your comfort zone? Every thought seems yours, but not all of them are. Some are scripts, others are shields, still others are echoes of wounds you never chose. The most dangerous lies are not the ones you hear, they are the ones you think. Your mind is not evil, it's efficient. It has only one job, to keep you safe. But being safe does not mean being real, and being real isn't always comfortable. You think you're making decisions, but what if you're just following instructions from a system programmed to avoid discomfort? You didn't send the message because you didn't have a head. You didn't speak because the timing wasn't right. You didn't choose to grow. You rationalized stagnation. But this logic, it wasn't logical, it was camouflage. Because deep down, your brain prefers to feel right than to feel vulnerable. It prefers the illusion of control than to face the truth. This is not your fault, it's biology, but consciousness. That is your responsibility. Your thoughts are not facts, they are defense mechanisms with good marketing. So the question is not, is my mind lying to me? But, what lies have I accepted as identity? If you've ever felt stuck and couldn't explain why, the problem wasn't lack of motivation, it was a story, a subconscious plot designed to protect you. You're not ready, you don't belong. Don't complicate things. They sound like intuition, but they are recycled fear, and the more you believe them, the more you build a reality around the pain you want to avoid. Instead of the truth you need to live. But there is an even deeper layer. What if lying had become your personality? What if the role you're playing was written out of fear? You may start to achieve things, goals, success, recognition, and still feel more and more disconnected from yourself. Because lying doesn't just block pain, it also blocks joy. The discomfort you feel today is not random. It is your true self knocking on the door, not to embarrass you, but to set you free. Because underneath survival mechanisms, rationalizations, stories, there is someone who remembers what it feels like to be whole. And this person is still there. They don't need fixing. They need to be remembered. They need your permission. The safest lies are those that sound like truth. You didn't start out this way. There was a time before filters, before calculated silence, a time when you felt without asking permission. You acted without fear of impact. You laughed loudly. You cried without guilt. But over time, adapting became you re-armor. And this armor became heavy. You were not born afraid to speak. You were taught to do that. You were not born with fear of failure. That came from you punishments, disappointments, and rejection. And little by little, silently, your brain built a world where surviving meant being silent. Each small moment of repression added a brick to the wall between who you are and who you show yourself to be. And now, you've lived behind that wall for so long that you call it home. But it's not a house. It's a cell built by misunderstandings. And today, it's cracking. Because your true self has always been watching, waiting, whispering through the numbness, asking, not demanding, to be remembered. The mind protects, yes, but it also forgets. It forgets that the most dangerous cage is the one that seems safe. It forgets that the deepest pain doesn't come from what we feel, but from what we silence. So we don't feel. And what if this discomfort is not something to avoid, but something to cross? What if anxiety isn't a sign that something is wrong, but that something real is awakening? The truth does not scream, it whispers. And these whispers are the beginning. What if this is the beginning, not of a collapse, but of a return to the truth, to breathing, to presence, to you? Keep watching, Because if your mind lied to you today, maybe it's because you're finally ready to hear the truth. Comment below if you've ever caught your mind lying to you. Write in the comments, "I see the lie." Subscribe if you felt an echo. If this video is already playing in parts of you where words don't normally reach, subscribe. You are not alone in this kind of silence. Because what's next, it may not be comfortable, but it will be real. The mind is not evil, it's efficient. It doesn't lie to destroy you, it lies to preserve you. But in the process, it transforms survival into stagnation. So let's go back, not to your memories, but to your standards. How many times have you justified a choice with logic, only to realize later that it was fear in disguise? "I'm too tired to go. I need more time to decide." They probably wouldn't call. Every sentence sounds rational, but underneath the logic, there is an emotion you didn't want to feel. This is the architecture of the inner lie. The brain receives a stimulus, feels emotional discomfort, creates a story to reduce the tension. Psychology calls this cognitive dissonance. When behavior doesn't align with values, the mind invents a plot to close the gap. But here's the catch. The story is comforting, but it's rarely true. You don't send the application. Your mind says it wasn't the time, but deep down, it was fear of rejection. You don't reply to that message. Your mind says you're setting limits, but inside, it's fear of connection. This happens in milliseconds. So fast you don't even notice. So subtle it feels natural. You believe you're making a conscious choice, but it's an emotional defense, rationalized later. And that's where the inner lie becomes dangerous. It doesn't look like a lie. It feels like self-awareness. Now stop. Think of a recent decision that seemed right. Was it guided by clarity or by fear disguised as logic? This is not an attack on your mind. It's an invitation to observe it. Your mind evolved to protect you from predators, hunger, abandonment, and today it protects you from vulnerability, uncertainty, expansion. That opportunity you turned down, growth, that conversation you avoided, growth, that risk you postponed, growth. Every logical avoidance can be an emotional bypass. Worse, your intelligence can make your inner lies even more sophisticated. Because the more self-aware you are, the better you are at explaining your pains. Without ever feeling them, the mind becomes a courtroom. Logic is the lawyer, emotion is the prisoner, and the truth silenced. Your mind doesn't need facts, it needs security. Now, let us dive deeper. The smarter you are, the more convincing your inner lies become. Very self-conscious people suffer more, because they can justify everything, even their own pain. But what if you stopped defending yourself? What if you let the discomfort exist, without explanation? Because that's where the truth lies, not in the thoughts you repeat, but in the feelings you repress. Carl Jung said, "People do anything to avoid confronting the soul." Let's be more precise. People construct entire identities to avoid a single feeling. They become successful to avoid the feeling of insufficiency. They become pleasant to avoid rejection. They become busy to avoid emptiness. And in the process, they lie beautifully. But now that you see the architecture of the inner lie, do you still trust the architect? Keep watching, because what's next is the moment when the lie begins to collapse. Wake up, breathe, move, and yet something is wrong. There's a silent war inside you, but so familiar you've mistaken it for normalcy. The invisible conflict is not noisy, it's subtle. It's the tension between who you are and who you pretend to be. You continue with the routine, work, conversations, appointments, but underneath there is friction, an internal noise, a mismatch between what you think and what you feel. You're smiling, but your jaw clenches. You are calm, but your chest is heavy. You're giving in, but your stomach turns when you say yes, meaning no. It's not tiredness. It's not exhaustion. It is internal betrayal. You abandon yourself over and over to keep the role your mind created. And the cost of this, chronic tension, emotional numbness. repetitive patterns that make you think, I've lived this before. This conflict appears everywhere. In the relationship you have, even when your body retracts when you hear the other's voice, in the work you endure. Even though every email eats away at you, in the way you speak with kindness, while your soul begs for truth, but you stay, because staying seems safer than confronting the lie. Your mind says, this is stability, but your body responds, this is prison, and you start to notice strange things. You laugh at jokes you don't find funny. You agree with ideas that shrink you. You avoid the mirror, afraid of the reflection being too honest. You feel emptiness even after being praised. Not because the compliment is fake, but because it was directed at a version of you don't even know. The conflict intensifies at night. When the noise of the world ceases, the truth whispers, thoughts race, your chest tightens. You scroll through your phone in numbness, because to feel would mean to face, and facing can mean changing. And change, it's dangerous, not because it's painful, but because it threatens the version of you others grew to love. You were taught to please, to anticipate others' needs, to avoid conflict at all costs. But peace bought with the denial of your truth is not peace, it is suppression. The mind deceives you by confusing familiarity with security, even if that familiarity is a slow erosion of your essence. You become two people, the one you show and the one you silence. But over time, the space between them becomes unbearable. You feel it in your posture, your tone of voice, in sleep that never gets deep. You long for coherence, for alignment, but to do so, you need to dismantle the you built to adapt. Carl Jung wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it destiny. Most people are not living their life, they are living their defense mechanisms. You long for freedom, but you fear the cost. You want peace, but you fear the fire needed to conquer it. But here's the truth. The fire is already burning inside you, and pretending doesn't erase it, it just feeds it. What you fear is not being exposed, it is expanding, because authenticity is raw. It doesn't apologize. There is no peace in performance. The invisible war ends, not with answers, but with honesty. You stop editing, stop shrinking. You start to breathe, and for the first time, you feel whole. Because when the lie collapses, your true self doesn't just emerge. It demands to live. Keep watching, because in the next chapter, the mask starts to crack, and what's behind it may finally make sense. Every identity built on fear eventually cracks. You can sustain a performance for years. You can convince yourself everything is fine. You can argue, rationalize, distract yourself. But the day comes when something inside you can no longer keep the facade. And it's not usually dramatic. Sometimes it's a different silence. A tear that comes out of nowhere. A moment when you look in the mirror and whisper, I don't know who I am anymore. This moment is not collapse, it is birth. It is the beginning of the end of the lie. The collapse doesn't come as a storm, it comes as discomfort, then resistance, and finally, mourning. Yes, mourning. For the you who did what they could to survive. For the you who was kind when you wanted to scream. Who was strong when you needed to be held. Who stayed when everything inside wanted to leave. You were not fake, you were conditioned, and now you are awakening. But waking up hurts, because it threatens everything familiar. The relationships that depended on your silence. The work built on your obedience. The image maintained at the cost of your exhaustion. When the lie begins to dissolve, the structures that supported it tremble, and that scares us. But this pain is not destruction, it is revelation. You begin to feel what you buried for years. You start saying things you never dared to. You get scared of yourself, not because you're breaking down, but because you're finally being real. The collapse reveals everything carried in silence. The sadness you never cried, the anger you swallowed, the desires you erased. This is not regression, it is reconnection. You're not falling apart. You are returning to the parts of yourself that have been forgotten. Carl Jung wrote, we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious. To collapse the lie is to look your shadow in the eye and keep the gaze. The darkness you fear is not your enemy, it is your integrity, your essence demanding space, and with that come questions that hurt. Who am I without the applause? What do I want without trying to please? Who do I become if I stop being what's expected of me? These are not crisis questions. They are matters of awakening. And yes, parts of you will die, but these were already languishing. You'll cry for the control you thought you had. You'll say goodbye to the version of you that tried to be everything, but in return, you gain presence. The truth does not destroy who you are. It destroys who you are not. Collapse is not the end. It's an invitation to rebuild, not from fear, but from truth. You start again. Now, with your voice, your desires, your limits. Not everyone will like this version of you, but the ones that matter, they will recognize you. Because it will sound honest. Even when you want to give up, the breakdown continues. It doesn't ask for your comfort, only your courage. This process is confusing. It's non-linear. In some days, you'll retreat. In others, you'll surprise yourself. You start to tolerate less, accept more, choose silence over performance, presence instead of perfection. You stop shrinking to fit. You start expanding to be. And in this expansion, you find peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the end of the internal war. Keep watching, because in the next chapter, we stop asking if the mind lies, and we begin to ask, who were we before lying was necessary? Before you learned to edit your truth, before your voice was trained to please, there was an I that simply was, not perfect, not domesticated, but whole. This self felt everything, moved without fear, spoke without calculating the impact, laughed loudly, cried shamelessly. It didn't ask permission to exist. It just existed. And then domestication began. You said you were spontaneous. You were taught to be restrained. You said what you felt. You were told you were too sensitive. You were whole. You were told you were too much. Gradually, you molded yourself, hiding, camouflaging, putting on masks that made survival safer, but authenticity more distant. And so, the real self wasn't lost. It was buried. Now, with the lie collapsing, something awakens from under the rubble. That original self, imperfect, intense, true, wants to return, but it's afraid. It remembers what it cost to be seen, remembers the shame, the silence after exposure, the words that didn't come back, the looks that hurt more than screams. So when you begin to regain that self, your mind resists. They will think you are strange. It's not safe. You won't be accepted. But here's the paradox. The only way to be whole is to become everything you. Once silenced, you don't become more yourself by adding things. You become more you by remembering who you were before they taught you to forget. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you really are. You are not your role, not your fears, not your adaptations. You are the one who survived all this, and you are still here." To heal is not to become someone new. It's to return to who you've always been. Now the path is not forward, it's inward. You start to listen to the body, speaking even with a trembling voice, saying what you never dared, laughing freely, stopping without guilt. You stop trying to be interesting. You start being whole. You abandon arguments, roles, defenses, and you ask, if I weren't afraid, what would I create? You breathe without asking permission. You live without apologizing. You don't need to be fixed. You need to be felt, to be welcomed by you. And the more you allow this I to speak, the more the world responds. Not always with applause, but with truth. Some people will leave, some bonds will crumble, some masks will fall off, but what remains is real. What arises is sacred. You become a mirror, not of perfection, but of possibility. And that changes everything, because when one person dares to live without lying, they give permission to others to try to. Here you are, still afraid, still in doubt, but present, and presence is the beginning of transformation. You're not becoming someone new, you're remembering who you were before the world taught you to forget. That's it. It is the beginning of peace. You don't need a plan, just trust that what has been hidden still has a voice. Let it talk, let it stumble, let it shine, because your true self is not a concept, it's a return. If this video spoke to you, don't ignore it. Let it echo a little more, not in words, but in the space they opened. Write in the comments, before the lie, I was. Let's honor together the voice that has been silenced. Let's remember who we were before we were taught to forget. Subscribe if you felt seen. This space is not about answers, it's about permission. To feel, to ask, to come back to you. Share with someone who needs to be reminded of what's real. Because there are people waging internal wars with a trained smile. Unlearning the lie is finding the self that was underneath. We began asking if the mind could be trusted, and we finish remembering the enemy was never the mind. It was unconsciousness. You're not here to be perfect, you are here to be true, and now you are.